I'm gonna try to find something that's like not too difficult, but also something that I can use to explain. So this design is a bit unusual, but don't let that put you off. It will serve just fine as a demonstration. You definitely want to up the contrast so you can easily see the highlight, shadow, and base color. Kind of the same deal as hair, really. Just trying to adjust the contrast so it's easier to see. Oops, didn't mean to paste that. So the flow with cloth is actually pretty much the same as the flow with hair. Which is funny because in 3D, like, hair and cloth simulation are also kind of related. In some ways, hair is just like really fancy cloth. Just gonna start with the base color. Oh, that's fine for a base shape. I'm just gonna... Alright, so again, for you guys, I would start with a sketch, but in the interest of speed, I've just laid down a base color, and then I'm gonna fix any kind of mistakes that I made in the silhouette as I'm painting in the shadows. Again, start with the big sections, so like literally just like hair, you have this section, you have this section that goes over it, you have this section that continues from here. Think about the kind of shape and try to visualize where the cloth is going if you're able to, and make sure like you get the right lines. So for example, like this cloth, you see like it goes up here and then it kind of folds over here. So you want to make sure that in your drawing, this line is also kind of continuous, like it doesn't, you don't want this to kind of go in the wrong direction. Like over here, you have the line that stops here and then like, oh, where did it go? So you definitely want to keep in mind the 3D shape of the cloth. And you have this nice ring here, this ring here. So just definitely keep in mind of stuff like that. Do the leather stuff. Oh, this one has leather too, so I mean, 2 birds with 1 stone. Just gonna do that as well. Fill in a nice base color just so it's not... Oh. I did the leather on the same layer as the shadow, which you definitely should not do, but I'm just gonna go with it. One thing to think about when you're doing cloth is if you have something that's like pulling the cloth together, like a belt or any like anything tied around the cloth, it's always going to extrude a bit. So here the cloth is just, this is the belt right here, and the cloth is just going to poke out like that. And looking at the big shape here, you can see that like this area is relatively light and this whole area is dark. So we're just gonna do the big area first, and then we'll go in and do the smaller folds. For drawing cloth, a big help will be just like honestly finding the right reference. So if I want to draw a dress, this is great, but even if I wanted to draw a dress that's shaped like this and I didn't have this exact reference, I want to find something that's similar in weight and probably color as well. If you're drawing a silk dress, for example, if you want to draw a silk dress, for example, you want to use a silk dress as a reference, and preferably of like a similar color, because different colors will react to light very differently depending on the material. And unlike with hair, you can have a lot of different varieties in material for cloth. Like you can even have a leather dress, right? So even though generally hair, okay, well hair comes in like maybe 3 or 4 varieties, but I think with cloth you can have way more than that. The thing that changes the most is probably just the size of the fold. So if you have cloth where the folds are smaller, usually that's going to mean like a much finer material. Like if you had silk, for example, the folds are probably going to be much finer than this. And the highlights are also going to be much stronger. Something you really want to keep in mind is the silhouette of the fold. So you want to exaggerate the shape a little bit. If you just give it like a quick glance, maybe it just kind of looks like a straight line down to you, but what you actually want to do is exaggerate the parts where there's a highlight. So I'm just going to make it stick out a bit more actually. And then that will make the shape of your cloth easier to read. Something that's kind of difficult to control when you're drawing cloth is how hard or soft your edges are. So I've been using this brush the entire time. It's the same one I use for hair. And it's just something you have to keep in mind, that like this edge is really soft, this edge is really hard. At this stage, I would say just follow the reference. I wouldn't say it's like easy per se, but when you have a reference and you know what to look for, it does make the process a lot easier. So I'm trying to kind of break down my thought process, so hopefully it gives you guys a guide of how you can think the same way about cloth. Like this is definitely going to take a lot of practice to understand what's going on, I guess. But in the meantime, it helps to, instead of looking this as like a big shape with like so many folds, to simplify it and try, as much as possible turn it into like a step-by-step process. I guess my goal is to get as close to the simplicity of like a paint by numbers as possible. So this whole part was just done with 2 colors, the base color and the shadow color. And even when you're practicing, actually just use 2 colors. Maybe not like in your final paintings, but when you're practicing, limiting yourself to 2 colors and 1 brush will help a lot. And also that 1 brush is not going to be the airbrush, just any other brush, but not a soft brush. And if you guys want, I highly encourage you guys to actually do practices like these. I wouldn't necessarily recommend like sharing these publicly per se if you're trying to like grow your social media following or anything like that, because most people like don't understand studies and the point of these is more to practice. But I'm always happy to look over your stuff and give you any feedback if you're like trying to practice and get better. Maybe I could point you in the right direction. So yeah, this brush is really not the easiest brush to use. But I think it's very rewarding when you do master it. I think the thing to keep in mind is that like it kind of only works in like the direction that you draw in actually matters, because it's strong on one side and soft on the other side. So this is something that you kind of just have to practice to get used to. But it helps to, like I said, stick to 2 colors. And what you can also do is increase the contrast. So your light color should be lighter. And what you want to do is just like experiment with drawing in one direction and then drawing in the other and see which one looks better, and then keep drawing like that. So for example, here I'm drawing left to right in this section, because if I draw left to right, it'll be lighter above and darker below, which is what I want. So with the darker color, I want it to fade from very dark to slightly lighter. In some ways, this brush is like magical because it cuts down the drawing you have to do by half if you are really used to it. Instead of drawing like a hard edge and instead of doing like let's say a hard edge and then a soft edge, you can just kind of do this with like a similar result, but it's really not that easy, I guess. It's definitely not the easiest thing to use. But it is really fun and it's kind of my bread and butter. The secret to good rendering is just being able to control your edges. Yeah, it does have a little bit of texture that can make it look a little bit watercolory, which is also really nice, I think. I think this brush might have... Okay. I had a similar brush once that was just called a magic brush that I downloaded from somewhere. But this is no longer that one. I would never ever use the smudge tool. Like, if you want to have more of like a natural mixing, I would experiment with the mixer brush. It's not the easiest thing to use, and that's why I didn't cover it here. But maybe I can like upload a mixer brush. Yeah. And okay, I will like upload this mixer brush and then maybe take a screenshot of my current settings. It's kind of like a decent default that you can use to experiment with. I like go back to the mixer brush like from time to time just to test it out, and I don't actually use it that much. I don't find Photoshop's blending even as good as like some other software. So generally I always just stick to the default brush because it gives me the most control. So I think this is pretty far with just 2 colors. Just gonna fill in the leather a bit more because I painted over some of it. I'm gonna have one more darker color just for the darkest shadows. Right. In that case, if you're looking for brushes that blend even more, like I would try out something like Clip Studio or Paint Tool Sai or something. I don't really use Photoshop that much for like natural blending. Like Photoshop, you kind of have to do a more manual blending. In some ways, this brush kind of blends itself with the color underneath, and okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that one. I'm just gonna leave it here with the darker color because I don't want to overdo it. Maybe lower the opacity a little bit. Do I want to do another highlight on the cloth? Maybe. Let's do it. Like the highlight step, but just a little bit for comparison. This is the highlight and shadow. Lastly, but not least, we're going to do the leather. So leather reflects the color of the light, which in this case is very white. It's not pure white, so we're just going to take this. Usually you want a nice texture on the leather, so I'm just going to try to use this texture brush and see if it works for my purpose. This might actually turn out really horribly. We'll see.